doors opened, pathways opened, and I got really compelled by this idea of bringing a holistic, almost blueprint to a viewer, giving them a film that says, all right, when you watch this film, by the end of this film, you will have at least a working knowledge of why people flee, why they came to New York, and what they go through once they're there. I needed to do that, and I thought it was a privilege to do it.
The question of illegal immigration is all over the news these days, but in a media environment where journalists are trying to either make you angry or afraid, it's not always easy to see the actual people beyond the headlines. In his new documentary, Roads of Fire, filmmaker Nat Lezra turns down the volume, providing a nuanced look at three sides of this complicated situation. One thread follows a group of immigrants making their way from Venezuela to Colombia, where they start the dangerous overland hike through Panama's Darién Gap. Another thread introduces us to the advocates, religious leaders, and community volunteers working in and around New York City who are trying to house, feed, and guide the immigrants who have been granted temporary asylum. And finally, we spend time getting to know one asylum seeker who's trying to make a new life in the United States for herself and her children as she flees an abusive situation in her home country. Whatever you believe about the policies around the issue of immigration, there is so much to learn and appreciate in this timely film, and we hope that our discussion with Nat Lezra is a worthy accompaniment to the film. Join us for our conversation on Inside the Arthouse, starting now.
Hi, my name is Greg Lemley, and welcome to today's episode of Inside the Arthouse. My usual co-host, Raphael Sparge, is a working actor, and he's working, so we're happy for him. And sorry that he can't be here for this episode with Nat Lezra, the director of a new documentary that's going to be coming out in theaters, Roads of Fire. Thank you for joining us today, Nat.
Thanks for having me.
Roads of Fire is a film about immigration worldwide, but very specifically immigration in the United States. What was the inspiration for this film?
It's a good question. I think that the best way to answer it is to sort of describe some of the steps of production. So the inspiration broadly is my witnessing of the migration crisis in New York.
Right, okay.
We had been finishing my previous film, and the studio where we were cutting was in Midtown. And so this was in early mid 2022. And right in that period of time was when the busing, what was then called the busing crisis, was starting to accelerate. So we would leave the edit bay and we would see just these lines of people circling the blocks, confused, dehydrated, malnourished people, and no representatives of the city administration, no representatives of the government really. So it was just these migrants, these refugees who were on the streets, and a handful of NGOs and volunteers who were sort of distributing food and trying to help them out. So I got really interested in them. I got interested specifically in the volunteers initially. First off, their material response was, but also I was interested in, what's the mental health perspective of the volunteers themselves? How strung out are they? How stretched to the breaking point are they when they're doing the city's job? So initially it was from that perspective. And so my response or my interest came from a place of looking at the volunteers, looking at the sort of municipal response. And then as I started working with these volunteers, I met more asylum seekers and migrants, and I realized that the story that we needed to tell and the discussion that we needed to have was about the broad implications of migration in general. There was so little knowledge, so much ignorance that I had even. And so I think I was kind of interested in my own ignorance about the subject. And so I started learning more, speaking to more people, doors opened, pathways opened. And I got really compelled by this idea of bringing a holistic, almost blueprint to a viewer, somebody who knows nothing about migration, giving them a film that says, all right, when you watch this film, by the end of this film, you will have at least a working knowledge of why people flee, why they came to New York, and what they go through once they're there. I needed to do that, and I thought it was a privilege to do it.
Wow. Is there any sort of personal background to the idea of specifically? I mean, you're confronted with it. I mean, it's right there on the streets in front of you. But I'm curious. I mean, look, I'm a first-generation American.
Yeah.
So stories of migration, stories of refugees are very important to me. My family were arguably, we're refugees. And if they had to stay in the country that they were from, I would not be here today.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's very intimately woven into my life. So my father is from Spain. He fortunately has not experienced flight, an exodus, being a refugee. But his father, he grew up in Spain. He was my grandfather in a place called Melilla, which is a Spanish protectorate in northern Africa. So my father was raised in northern Africa, and when he was a teenager, during the younger than teenager, 10, 12 years old, the Civil War broke out, and the fascists rose through Africa. And so the initial concentration camps.
That's right. Franco was was
he was
in
the
Africa.
general of the northern armies, so the northern African armies. So the first labor camps and concentration camps that were perpetrated by the Franco regime were in northern Africa. And so my grandfather's father was thrown into a concentration camp, and through a really sort of murky system of bribery, he was able to bribe his way out of that camp, and then they fled. So my grandfather, now being 12 years old, young teenager, they fled with nothing to Tangier and started over their lives with absolutely nothing in Morocco. And so my grandfather died not too long ago, but to the last days of his life, he could intimately tell you about the streets of Tangier when he was a kid, and he spoke by that point French, Italian, Arabic, Spanish, English. But they started with nothing in Tangier, and my grandfather was known as the donkey boy of Tangier. It's sort of a family story because to get whatever they could, he was the delivery kid, and he would drive a donkey cart delivering people their shipments. And so he knew the geography of Tangier like the back of his hand. And so to the day he died, he could talk about the different alleys and all of these things. So anyway, I think that he was somebody, the more I learned about my grandfather's life, and by extension, my dad's life and my family history, I think that refugee as a concept, fleeing mass migration, fleeing geopolitical crises, that was just something that I wanted to.
Right. Well, you're a documentary filmmaker. You can make a film about a subject without having a personal connection. But I think maybe certainly gives you an authenticity to say, I can tell this story. I should tell this story because this is my story. This is, arguably, potentially the story of every American other than indigenous people.
Right. Well, and I think that's a huge part of it too. We look at who we are, we look at the people around us, and whenever I tell that story, it becomes clear to me that most of the people in my life are one degree removed from a story of migration themselves. This is the plausible sort of story that we tell about this country, is that it's a country of immigrants, for immigrants, by immigrants. And I do think that's true. Yeah.
You open with that clip of conservative icon Ronald Reagan talking about immigration.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was difficult to find, that clip necessarily, or people on both sides of the political spectrum talking about immigration. But I thought that was particularly apt to start there.
I actually don't even think that that's the birth of this narrative, but it was an incredibly famous speech that really rang out. And I think that we take for granted that narrative. We sort of even maybe not undermine it, but we sort of take for granted this idea of immigration and the sort of romance of that in America. By the time we start to grow up, we sort of realize the complexity of our history. But it is an incredibly powerful narrative. What Ronald Reagan said in that clip, this idea of the value of our country being built off the back of immigration and new Americans, the doors are open, these things. When I was down south at the border with Venezuela, when I was shooting this film, I really encountered much more than I expected people saying, we're coming to the United States because the United States said that their doors are open and that it's the promised land, and all of these golden idealistic ideas. And they're things that we take for granted or that we kind of walk away from by the time we start to grow up, but they're very powerful around the world to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have a big focus, of course, but when you get to the streets of, you have a focus on migration coming through South America, but when you get to the streets of New York, there are people from all over the world.
That's right.
From Africa, from Asia, from everywhere. Refugees. Yeah. I think there's a level where I think it's really important to use that word.
Yeah.
I guess, is it valuable to talk about the history of our country's relationship with refugees over time? I know my family was fortunate to be able to arrive in a period when immigration was almost completely cut off in the 30s. Just very fortunate.
Sure.
But prior to World War I mean, let's talk about percentages. I mean, how many Americans were foreign-born, in the years before World War I versus, now? And maybe you don't know, but or even just to talk in round terms.
Yeah, this is a crucial point, and it's one that I should be better educated about. But I'm
going to get you ready for those Q&As.
But where we should start, though, is if we're being really honest with our perception of immigration, we should talk about slavery.
Okay.
And what is our perception of what it is to be an American if a huge populace was taken from other countries as a labor force, right? So if this country is built off the back of and in the wake of something like slavery, where what are now, Black Americans, many of them, when you trace their lineage back, are places like Ghana, Haiti, just Western Africa and
right.
Southwest
Coast, et cetera. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's important to start there. I think that there are these different waves that you can track. I don't know that I want to give a percentage in terms of the populace, just because I don't know the number. I know more about 20th century, but I think that by the time we're in the era of the First World War, we are seeing a huge influx of Irish immigrants, a huge influx of Italian immigrants. It comes back to this premise that the film talks about, which is that the geopolitical crises of the day dictate the flows of immigration to the United States.
Yes.
So when there, the potato famine, all of these different things, that those events shaped our entire identity. So that's, I think, where we should start, and maybe where we can bring that path to is, our role in the 20th century in Latin America and our role in places like the Middle East have also radically shaped our identity as a country. So we talk about the spike in Latin American people in general. Well, the reason that there is such a growing number of Venezuelan, Cuban, Peruvian, Chilean, Colombian, obviously, Panamanian people, Ronald Reagan, but we can trace it even farther back. I would have started, and I have.
Go to Dole Pineapple if you want.
Right?
Yeah.
Our politics shaped their politics.
Right. We destabilized places in the world, and
that destabilization created the first generation of what became the migrant crisis here.
Yeah. I'm pushing us off track of the film because I think this is it's an important subject. To me personally, it's an important subject for our country, and I applaud the film for trying to have a real grown-up conversation about this. And it certainly put a human face. I mean, you put a human face on people who are what they have to do to leave their country of origin and get here. You put a very human face on what happens when they are here and going through the process. I mean, it's a sort of a three-part film. And then the third part being sort of where you started talking about, which is the people that are here and trying to respond to the situation, whether NGOs, immigration attorneys who are, helping to advise people and provide resources. When did you come up with that idea of let's break this down in that fashion?
What you see in the film is a fairly chronological depiction of my journey into the story itself.
Okay.
In a pretty literal way. So when you watch the film, there will be a period of time where you see that I'm with a specific volunteer. She was my point of access to the entire world of this. And so I'm with her in a moment where she gets a phone call that is calling for aid down to another humanitarian organization. So I tracked with her in real time. I had not met these people. I tracked with her trip down in her car from the Bronx down to this East Village NGO who were in crisis. There was miscommunication about when a group of migrants were going to arrive.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and a group of
Evie Loves New York.
Evie Loves NYC in the East Village. So about 800 people had just gotten to New York. They'd been there for about 24 hours. They'd come from 60-hour bus rides and were malnourished, dehydrated, exhausted. It was November and they were freezing. And Evie Loves had not started their cook yet. People were lining up and they were hours early. Anyway. That trip with Adama from the Bronx down there was the first time that I was brought to Evie Loves. I then meet Sasha and Mahmoud, the founders of Evie Loves.
Right.
They become primary subjects of the film. They introduce me to Father Mike. They bring me into the faith world. Father Mike introduces me to Maria, our asylum seeker, and then that's sort of how at least the New York side was told.
And then from there you decided, you know what, I need to go down to Colombia and see, what happens here.
To what we were talking about a little bit earlier, I started to feel like I can't, in good faith, tell this story without confronting my own, some of my own blind spots about the history and the geopolitics of the region. So if Maria is experiencing this now, what are the material circumstances of Ecuador that brought her here, that made her flee? Outside of just her personal story, what are the infrastructure issues? What are the violence issues? What are the economic issues and the pressure points that create the need to flee? I couldn't go to Ecuador, but I could go to Colombia.
Right.
And so that was my goal, was to kind of confront the geopolitical side of it so that a viewer watching the film can now have a more holistic understanding.
Yeah. One thing that struck me in the film is I'm looking at the the funds that are required to get people just to the start of the Darién Gap. And there's a level where I'm like, oh my God, couldn't they just hop on a plane?
Right.
And yet, anytime there is a need, unfortunately, there are people that rise to the occasion to exploit that need.
Yeah, very much so.
Cui bono, right?
Yeah.
Follow the money, as Deep Throat would say.
Yeah.
And the film spends a little time talking about that. So, did you know about this before you got to Colombia, or who is benefiting from this method of migration? Because it's not people hopping on a boat in Hamburg and getting off at Ellis Island.
Right. The cynical answer is many, if not everybody, except for the asylum seekers and refugees.
Yeah.
A better answer would be to look at just the experience that they're going through, and we can just put it together. So the people benefiting are everyone from the border guards that have to be bribed, the street vendors who themselves are asylum seekers but are then in turn vending water bottles at 400% the price.
Right.
$8 bottle of water. That is $1 bottle anywhere else. The smugglers themselves, who are also in many cases migrants or people who have migrated. Armies, cartels, gangs, politicians, local police, local immigration representatives. Step by step, every single person that a refugee encounters on this road, there is almost always unilaterally a price that needs to be paid, a fee, a bribe, a collaboration, up to the border of the United States.
And then once they're here, also there are those that are benefiting from this crisis. And I use the term, at least with regard to New York, the term crisis may be advised. There's a whole documentary to be made about what happened in 2022 and 2023 in terms of funds that were made available to New York. And you allude to it a little bit in the film, but I don't know if you want to talk about it here or...
Of course. And this film, and I find this in many, many films, a new film project that I'm working on, I'm encountering this also. There are 20 films to be made within this project. Yeah. A big portion of our time spent with EV Loves, for example, was about tracking their finances, their financial structures, the bidding on contracts, the pitching investors, the competition with other NGOs who are similarly scaled, and then the broader competition with these colossal organisms like ADOCO or some of these other MedRight and places like this. There's an entire film to be made about that, an entire examination to be done. I found the more that we got into that world that it removed us from the human experience of the asylum seekers themselves. I think it's a really important thing to talk about, but that's part of why we got away from it. And we allude to it because I think it's also important to highlight a major crisis that is a sort of sub-crisis within all of this, but it's one that's still gripping our country, which is the colossal level of cronyism, of municipal mishandling of resources, the broader federal mishandling of resources, and the handshake agreements that lead to $800 million contracts or 460.
No bid contracts.
No bid contracts, exactly. That's still affecting New York in a really big way.
A refrain that one commonly hears in a discussion about immigration, and especially from people who are maybe only 2 or 3 generations removed from being migrants or families, migrants themselves, is they came here the right way. So what was the right way?
It's so funny. I hear that a lot.
Look, there are people on a political spectrum who say that borders shouldn't exist and the free flow, and I'm not necessarily, borders have a function and a place and a purpose. And I think there was mishandling perhaps, or maybe certain problems. But let's still deal with, okay, what was the right way for your grandparents and great-grandparents, and how is that actually different today from what is legally the process?
Yeah. The way that I respond to that question or that scenario when it's posed nowadays is right now asylum seekers walking to a courthouse to do it the right way are being abducted by militarized ICE agents in masks and dragged to unmarked vehicles and taken to barrackses. Not even necessarily detention centers. And there's an important distinction there to be made, because when somebody's in a detention center, they're entitled to a lawyer. When they're in an unmarked room that's in an unmarked building, they're in a barracks. There's a different term for it. Therefore, there's an argument from the legal framework that they're being used, ICE, that people are not entitled to things because they're not being jailed. They're being processed. So these distinctions are actually really important from a rhetorical perspective. But if to do it the right way, you are being, you're exposing yourself to a vulnerability of being abducted by a militarized deportation force that is operating completely outside of the bounds of the law. what can therefore be the right way?
Right.
Obviously people talk a lot about Ellis Island.
Yeah, what was the right way then?
What was the right way then? There was no framework of right or wrong way. Ellis Island existed because people were just coming.
They were being processed. Yeah, okay.
They were just coming. Boats were just arriving, right? There wasn't like an agreement between Hungary and the officials of Ellis Island. There wasn't communication there. The boats were arriving, and this country was founded on an ideal of we will receive people. Give us your hungry, you're sick, you're poor. Yeah. And so they were doing that. Now, obviously, I don't know that much about Ellis Island beyond the obvious. I think that there was a policy in this country enacted under Biden that I think in many ways is actually a really strong policy, which is to relax some of our border laws, to bring people in because there were these crises in Latin America and elsewhere that we had a hand in making and in helping create. The Iraq War, for example, things like that, where there's huge volumes of Syrian migrants.
Syrian, yes.
Iraqi, not just what we talked about with Latin America. I think that one of the big problems with that period of time that led to a lot of this, first off, people don't talk about the fact that there was already a huge amount of migration. And there's a lot of politicizing of the language, and there was already a crisis, if you want to call it a crisis. What Biden did is he allowed, without a full knowledge of how there was going to be, what was the framework? I'm going to let a lot of people in. Great. That's a great humanitarian goal. Within these cities, what is the political and the resource framework to receive these people?
Yeah.
That was the big problem, I think. New York has a shelter law. We're a sanctuary city. A couple other cities do as well. What does that mean when the local government has no capacity to enact those laws? When ICE, the New York City Housing Authority, the Fire Authority, and the mayor's office aren't communicating. Where are these laws? Where are these rules and this idea of doing it right? There is no doing it right. There's no doing it if there's no one who has any capacity or idea of how to do it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? I know that was sort of
no. It makes sense. I mean, look, I learn a lot from documentaries. I learn a lot from film. I learned a lot from your film. But I'm remembering back to a film, unfortunately, I saw during the pandemic called Donut King, which is a film about donuts. And the pink box that we're all familiar with now for donuts started with a Cambodian immigrant.
That's really interesting.
And one of the things in the film was this idea that we recognized, okay, we have just, we've totally ripped apart this country, Cambodia, with an illegal bombing campaign. There's a massive refugee crisis. We're going to bring tens and thousands of refugees to this country. We're going to provide the federal resources to house them on arrival until they can be integrated into our society.
Right.
And now, years later, we look back and again, a massive immigrant success story about people who came to this country, were allowed to stay without fear of reprisal or deportation, that worked hard, found an industry where they could, have a financial stake in the success of this country. And you look back and you say, this is a massive success. Yeah. Why are we not talking about immigration in these terms?
Yeah, that's first off, I didn't know that story. So I now need to watch that film. I think that...
It was a small part of the film, mind you, but it was just, at the time.
It's an important part of it. I mean, to answer, I think the question that's in there is, it got really politically advantageous to both parties.
And not just in the U.S.?
And not just in the U.S. Oh, of course not. No, my God, the U.K., everywhere. Yeah. To traffic in, and this is not new. I should also, I'm going to finish my point, but I should say that none of this is new. It got really politically advantageous to capitalize on the fear of the financial impact of having refugees in our cities.
Yeah.
So trafficking in that fear, because of I think that nowadays a lot of it has to do with the commodity that is social media. So that fear can be quite literally commodified and vended to us on these apps. And so political parties understand the value of that and the importance of that, how we react to that stuff. Images of invaders and all of these things.
Right, the language we use. Okay,
that's the language we use. So I think the language shifted to accommodate that fear and the power of that fear. Fear is a very powerful force. And I think that, in the past, it was always a reactionary and a conservative talking point to demonize immigrants. That was always sort of part of it. This conception of the right way, the immigrants who are the good ones, they happen to be the ones who are often white and they're from more developed countries. They're often not the people who might build the railroads. Those are a labor force that, things like that. That language was always there and part and parcel with a lot of the identity of this country. But I do think that right now is a time of polarization and of politicized language in a way that we don't really know how to talk about because we are so delineated into camps. We're in the pro or the against. We're in the invaders or the here. You know, we're
no border. Yeah, we pushed everything to the
to as far as it can go. You know, and I think that's very valuable to the parties.
Well, hey. We are talking about the film, and I'd love to take a break here and just take a look at the trailer for the film. Let's look at the trailer for Roads of Fire.
You'll hear hurricane warnings.
Crisis at the border. 2 more buses carrying asylum seekers from Texas arriving in New York City.
I think Sandy was a great example. When it hit, it got out of hand, and we lost so many lives.
The New York City Mayor Eric Adams declaring a state of emergency over the ever-escalating number of asylum seekers coming to the city.
Bienvenido americano. Hay mucha gente que sueña por llegar acá, muere por llegar acá, pero no saben la realidad.
Yo tengo que jugar al gato y al ratón aquí, porque lo que yo hago no está permitido.
Migrants have been coming through for years. It's nothing new to NGOs who've been on the ground.
We have designed a system destined to fail.
The U.S. is facing a humanitarian crisis over where to place migrants who are seeking asylum in this country.
Human beings should not be treated as pawns in a political game.
Once again, attention is at our southern border. A new era of immigration policy here in the U.S.
Wow, that's super powerful. And yeah, watching it again, it's bringing back memories of watching the film. And as one of the quotes says, just how much of a human face it really puts on this. It's easy to talk about it, the problem in generic terms. When you talk about these are people.
Yeah.
And I think their stories deserve to be told.
Yeah.
What was your reaction as you watch it?
Yeah, it strikes me that, and I have this feeling increasingly when I watch the film itself of anger. A little bit, and frustration, but really this feeling of anger because when we were making the film, we didn't realize that we thought we were making a film about the climax of something, the apex. This is the story culminating, the migrant crisis, the refugee crisis in this country. We didn't realize that we were seeing the beginning of something. And everybody claps when they see the end of the film because it ends on a great note for Maria. And we were texting when it happened, felicidades, congratulations, and full caps, and it was very emotional for all of us. She gets her asylum. She wins her asylum here in this country, and now it might just not mean anything. And that's hard to watch. And when people clap, there is a little bit of a pit sometimes.
As we're recording this today, the film is already open in New York, and we're going to be opening in Los Angeles on the 31st of October. Where else will the film be playing?
Hopefully across the country. We've got plans to be in Albany. We've got plans to be in different places of California. We're looking at San Diego, Northern California. We've got conversations going in Chicago and other places. So I really want to bring it to El Paso. That's somewhere that I would love to bring in. We are talking to an organization down there who want to host it. So I think that it'll be a really interesting, tough conversation in a place like El Paso, but a worthwhile one.
Yeah, it should be a worthwhile conversation. This is not a polemical film. I think just trying to, put a human face on this. And I think that's, certainly part of a problem or what I perceive as being a problem is when we stop talking, when we don't talk about this as being humans.
Yeah.
And when we dehumanize these refugees, that allows us to treat them in a way that I think is beneath what is the character of our country. And other countries, of course.
Yeah.
If people want more information about where the film is playing and when, where do they go?
roadsoffiredoc.com.
Roads of Fire Doc.
roadsoffiredoc.com.
Okay.
I need to get some water in my mouth. You can go to New Mountain Films. That's our distributor. And on Instagram, Roads of Fire Instagram, Roads of Fire Doc.
Okay.
I should probably check that.
Got a Facebook account as well and everything like that?
Yeah. roadsoffiredoc.com is the best place to go.
Okay. And will you be accompanying the film to some of the screenings? All
I
of
hope
them, as many as you can.
As many as I
whatever?
can, yeah. I'm in production on a new film, so I have to be able to interweave my life from shooting to this. But yeah.
Another documentary or a feature?
Another doc, yeah.
Another doc. And what's on this subject, or is it peripheral?
I can't say too much about it, but
that's fine.
it's about a labor crisis that's happening here in the country. It's also something I'm really passionate about.
Well, thank you, Nat Lezra, for joining us on Inside the Art House. It's really great that you were here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Roads of Fire, which again is currently playing in New York. It's going to be opening in Los Angeles. Go to roadsoffiredoc.com for more information. And if it's not scheduled to play at your local art house, talk to the operator and, let's get, look, there are lots of different modes of distribution right now. Not everything needs to play 7 days. Yes, for qualified for Academy Awards and so on and so forth.
Right.
We know that. But there's just so many opportunities for films in this day and age to screen for a night, to screen for 2 nights or whatever, to screen for a group.
I should also say that it will be coming to VOD. It will be streaming. It will be online.
Yeah, and again, we want people to see these movies. We know that the theatrical release, in many ways, enhances the ability for them to see it in ancillary means. It's not easy to get yourself to a movie theater. It's especially for smaller films. But however you can reach this film, however you can find this film, whenever you see this podcast, if it makes you want to see it, go and find it. If it's not in your theater, it's going to be on VOD. That's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
This was lovely. It was a great chat, and it's a beautiful house you have here. I can't wait to catch a film here.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, please like, please share information about Inside the Art House in general, and especially Roads of Fire in particular, which is going to be playing around the country in the fall of 2025. And as the immigration situation continues to unfold in this country, a film that can help inform and educate about that subject. Thank you for being here on Inside the Art House. And again, thank you, Nat.
Thank you so much.
Our show was produced by Raphael Sparge with on-site producer Noreen Dickerson. Supervising producers are Thomas Cassetta and Miles McCreary. Our show was edited by Gabriel Emley and sound mixed by Thomas Cassetta. Our musical theme was composed by Isabel Engman and Gerardo Garcia Jr. Marketing by Gabriel Emley. Show graphics by Jenna DeAngelis. Additional marketing and web design by Stephanie Peters. Filmed at the historic Laemmle Royal Theater in Los Angeles, California. See you next time on Inside the Art House. If you like today's show, please consider subscribing to our channel to learn more on Inside the Art House.